This is Robert Newbauer. He was born July 19th, 1978. He has served in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. He is currently a major in the United States Army and is serving at the Joint Multinational Readiness Center in Hohenfels, Germany. Major Robert Newbauer is being interviewed by myself, Parker Lee. I am here with my mom, Erin Lee. I am his nephew, and am conducting this interview for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. All right, so we'll start. Where and when were you born?
Born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, July 19th, 1978.
And just tell me about your childhood. What was life
Well,
like?
grew up, had three sisters, two older, one younger. Lived in the same house for 18 years, which is a foreign concept to me nowadays, seeing how I've moved on average about every 2 years. So that was good. Like I said, grew up in Southwest Michigan, and we had a big yard. There, we were all very involved in sports, and I tried my best to make my sister's life very difficult. I think I did my job as a brother.
What sports did you play?
Growing up, I played baseball, basketball, football, and then later I got involved in tennis.
Are there any other family members who had served in the military?
So my maternal grandfather was a field artillery captain in World War II. He served in the European theater. An interesting thing is that when I was promoted from first lieutenant to captain, my mother pinned me. It's a tradition when you get promoted is that you're pinned by a special person of your new rank, and I was actually pinned using his captain's bars for when he served in World War II, which I thought was neat. Additionally, I have an uncle, my Uncle Mike, who served in the Vietnam War as part of the United States Marine Corps.
Did that influence your decision to join the military?
I can't say it did because I went into the military academy when I was I decided when I was 17 years old, and at that point, they didn't really have any bearing on that, and I think I was just too young to really kind of fully understand the commitment that I was undertaking, and just in short, no, it really didn't.
All right. Why did you go to the academy?
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't quite know why. I understood that there was a legacy of the tradition, and I knew it was a good academic opportunity. It also afforded me the opportunity to play football at the next level, which I was fortunate enough to do. And I think, looking back, I was a young kid who kind of needed that sort of regimen and discipline in my life, or else, I probably wouldn't have amounted to much had I not been forced into that atmosphere.
All right. Did you think about going to the Naval or Air Force, or were you set on West Point?
I applied to the Air Force Academy, was accepted there, but West Point was the only one that we visited. So I think when I received my acceptance, my mother was ecstatic about it. Of course, so was I, and it just kind of made sense at the time.
Yeah. What was life like at West Point? Did you enjoy yourself too?
I did. The stereotype and the reputation is that you walk around in squares all day in boots, which is not the case. And especially nowadays, it's evolved to a good university with just some military aspects. And so, to this date, the friends that I have, they all spawned and originated there at West Point, and looking back on, I have very fond memories.
Do you have one fond memory that you would like to share?
One particular fond memory. I remember the day I graduated, and it was nice to have, all my family there. All three of my sisters were there, and at that point, believe it or not, you were there. You were what I would call a level 0 human, so you could not do anything for yourself. But it was a fond memory because it culminated with graduation, but there were many events in the week leading up. I had a officer representative, instructor at West Point, who I still keep in touch with. He paid for a river cruise on the Hudson with my family, and I got a chance to show them the academy and some of the things that I did, and like I said, it culminated with the graduation and my commissioning. So if there was one singular moment, I'd probably pick that.
You talked earlier about the organization that you needed. Did you find that hard at West Point? Adapting to the regimented life?
Growing up, every Saturday morning, us kids would walk down, and the first thing we would see on a Saturday morning was our list of chores. And of course, you couldn't do anything. Excuse me. You couldn't do anything of pleasure until those chores were done. And so, growing up in the household we did, organization was just something that was prevalent, and we kind of got used to. And so, I adapted to it, I think, fairly easily.
All right. Like, coming right out of West Point, what did you do?
So, at the end of 4 years, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. And in your senior year in the Army, there are certain different branches. There's infantry, there's armor, field artillery. Because of what I studied at school, I chose to go into the Corps of Engineers. And so, I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, great, lovely place, where I went through officer basic course, where they teach you kind of some specifics about the branch, and how to conduct yourself as a brand new second lieutenant.
All right. Let's see. What did you do next?
Okay, so after that, there was a small group within the Corps of Engineers. They're called engineer divers, and so that interested me. I was fortunate enough to be selected in the program, and then I went down to Panama City, Florida, where I went through. It's actually a U.S. Navy run school, but there I learned how to dive using scuba, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, as well as it's called surface applied, a big helmet with an air hose to the top, and you focused on underwater engineering tasks such as demolition, cutting, welding, anything that you would find like a military type engineer to do on the surface. We learned to do that underwater, which I thought was pretty cool.
All right. Let's just keep going. What did you do after that?
Okay. Well, after that, it was November 21st. Woke up, brushed my teeth. No, kidding. From there, once I graduated the dive program, I moved to Fort Eustis, where I was Fort Eustis, Virginia. I'm sorry, where I was a platoon leader, and a platoon is a unit of organization within the Army. A platoon is about 30 individuals, 30 soldiers. Where it was a great experience. I was a junior officer, and I had a senior non-commissioned officer who was kind of my enlisted advisor, but between him and I, we kind of provided the leadership for that platoon, and we're able to do a myriad of tasks. Was able to travel quite a bit up and down the East Coast, and as well as we did a couple of missions and events on the West Coast, which was a good experience. From there, I was reminded that during my time at Fort Eustis, I met my wife. So at that point, we started seriously dating, and when we moved to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri back, I talked about that officer basic course, which you have to go through when you get first commissioned. The military has I think a good system, what we call PME, Professional Military Education. And typically, prior or right after you achieve a certain rank, they put you through some sort of schooling, in which then just kind of exposes you to different elements or different facets of the Army, which then you can put to use when you go back and rejoin the force. So we, wrong, right, or indifferent, I decided to get married and moved to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and went through school. From there, that was when I deployed first in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And there, I went as in a diving capacity. I talked to you about that. Our unit, our company, went there and was there for a year. Came back, and at the end of that year, moved back to Panama City, Florida, where I became the company commander. Again, a company is just the next echelon above platoon, and was the company commander of the U.S. Army portion of the dive school down at I talked about that Navy base. From there, while in Panama City, my first daughter was born, Julian Elizabeth. She was born April 19th, 2007. And then shortly thereafter, we moved to Germany for the first time. We moved to Garmisch, Germany, which is in the southern part of Bavaria. Lovely place. There I served as a facilities engineer for the base and some of the surrounding bases. So there was responsible for all new construction, maintenance, kind of the operations and maintenance for the bases, and the Kaserns is a German word, to make sure they continue to run. While in Germany, my second daughter was born, Ava Claire. She was born December 19th, 2008. Don't worry, I didn't mess that up. And we were there for about 2.5 years, and then from there, in September of 2009, we moved to Fort Carson, Colorado. At Fort Carson, Colorado, I was, we kind of talked about those echelons. There's platoon, company, and the next above company is battalion. I was a battalion operations officer for a unit at Fort Carson as part of the 4th Infantry Division. Shortly after arriving there, our brigade, and again, after battalion is next brigade, our brigade is about 5,000 or so. We deployed to southern Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom as well. There, at that point during Operation Iraqi Freedom, we were turning over the sovereign security to the Iraqi forces, and so a lot of our mission set included training the Iraqi forces, as well as ensuring that they had, my job, ensuring they had the necessary facilities, equipment to defend their country from both not only external threats but the internal threats that we still see today. Was in Iraq for a year. Came back in March of 2011, where I continued my job as the battalion operations officer. And right as I moved from the battalion operations officer to the battalion executive officer, our brigade again deployed to Afghanistan in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And much like in Iraq, the time that we went to Afghanistan, we were in the process of trying to turn over sovereign security to the Afghan national forces, and so our job was training the Afghan forces, again, making sure they had the resources to defend their country from both internal and external threats. Returned in December of 2012. Continued my job as battalion executive officer until I then moved to Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. And you're probably asking, what is an Army guy going to an Air Force base for? Well, I talked about that professional military education. Because of the deployments that our unit took part in, I didn't have a chance to go to what they call the major school, or the command and general staff college. So I was afforded that opportunity, and what they sometimes do is they like to take a sample from all of the other sister services, so you get a flavor from what the other services within Department of Defense are doing. So I, along with some other Army officers, some Navy officers, and Marine Corps officers, went to the Air Force version of the Command and General Staff College. We were there for a year, and then in summer of 2014, we moved from Maxwell Air Force Base to Hohenfels, Germany. We're currently serving, as you stated, the Joint Multinational Readiness Center, where we train NATO. We train our NATO partners in land warfare.
Near the beginning, when you were part of the platoon and you had missions along the east and west coast, what were some of those missions? What was your job?
So, one in particular down near Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. This was in support of the U.S. Coast Guard. They had a series of old and aging navigational beacons, towers, excuse me, that they wanted basically demolished because they were going to try to open up new navigation ways. And so they called our platoon, and we went down there, and I want to say there were probably 14 or 15 of these structures in the water. And we would dive down to the base of where the structure went into either the dirt or the rock at in the water. We would rig up explosives, come to the surface, get on the boat, move about 200 to 300 meters back, and blow. Sometimes we didn't move back far enough, but it was exciting nonetheless.
And then in your first tour, in the second and third tours, you said that you were supplying to almost like hand off the mission to them. But in the first tour, what were your jobs then?
The first tour, it was a mishmash of. I said I went in a diving capacity there, so. One story is that right off the coast of Iraq one of the largest cities outside of Baghdad in Iraq is called Basra. It's in the southern portion, and it's kind of an economic hub because it's Iraq's gateway into the Persian Gulf. About 90 kilometers outside of Basra is the Al Basra offshore oil terminal. And that is where a good majority of Iraq's oil is piped underwater out to the oil terminal. International tankers come to this thing, they'll hook up, and then carry the crude oil, out to the open market. Well, because during the initial invasion in 2003, the offshore terminal was damaged because we as the United States and the Allies wanted to degrade their economic capabilities so we could overthrow Saddam Hussein. Well, as we're trying to now stand up the Iraqi government, there was a large contract to bring this back and give Iraq its capacity to develop its economy. Well, our team was charged with overseeing some of the work that the contractor did, and so I had that was one of my jobs. We would dive in the Persian Gulf and make sure that the repairs and construction that was done at this offshore terminal, were to standard, and the U.S. government was getting its tax dollars worth. Another piece of that was, back to my engineer role, was fielding route clearance equipment. Okay, so if you can think of one job that you don't want to have in the Army, it's driving down roads looking for bombs. And so my branch, I talked to you about, we choose branches in the Army. Our branch kind of led the way of the Army in developing new techniques and new pieces of equipment to do that. And so one of the things that I was involved was fielding these new pieces of equipment to units in and around Iraq.
Let's see. Have you ever experienced any action?
Yes. I think in the read ahead you talked about what are the days like?
Yeah.
And so what I found, and again my story's much different than some of my other peers and some of the people I've served with, was that you had these long, boring times with sprinkled in there, very high moments of excitement and adrenaline, and then you get lulled back into just the same old day after day, and then another event, whether it would be an enemy shooting at you, or they would fire artillery. That was very, very popular for the enemy to do, was that lob mortar rounds or lob rockets into the your base camp that you were staying at. So, like I said, that was kind of the pace of it. You'd have these stretches of just kind of boredom, if you will, sprinkled in with these times of excitement that really got your adrenaline going.
During those times of boredom, what did you do to try and not be bored?
Well, maybe boredom's not the correct term I wanted to use, but became kind of repetitive because you're trying to build the capacity of some of these host nation security forces, whether they were Iraqis or Afghans, and so that in itself took up a lot of time. But in terms of when you did get some free time, I tried to stay physically active, whether that was going to the gym or trying to run in whatever small area you had. I always did a good job of trying to keep in touch with my family. I often think back to my grandfather who left in 1942 and didn't come back until 1945. And he really only had snail mail to talk to his family with, whereas, I could utilize FaceTime or Skype or, any sort of, video mechanism to talk with my family, which, I'm very grateful for.
In your role of helping the Afghans or the Iraqis get their own military started, how do you do that? Like, what is your role in that part?
Well, I think that's two phase here. The first thing is one, you have to develop a relationship with them, okay? And so that's what I did. Okay, you have to connect with them on a personal level. You have to show them that, hey, I'm here with you as a partner. I'm here to fight alongside you, and I'm here to build your capacity in whatever way I can. Whether that's lending them some of the professional military education that I had, or whether that's help them uh, procure a new type of equipment that either their government was buying or that we were supplying for them. Okay, the first one is, like I said, you got to develop that personal relationship with them. The second piece is you have to operate within what their government provides. So I found that the Iraqi government provided, I think, a good set of or good equipment for them to utilize, and so a lot of that was American or stuff that we use, and so whether it was an M4 rifle or a Humvee, on the basic level, you train them how to use those pieces of equipment. For the Afghans, it was a little different. The main vehicle that the Afghan government provided their army was the Ford Ranger. Okay, and so I know this sounds odd, but a Ford Ranger, which was a manual transmission. Okay, there weren't too many Afghan soldiers who were very used to driving a manual transmission vehicle. So while I never thought as a major in the United States Army I'd be teaching a battalion, a Kandak was the Afghan term for that, of how to drive a manual transmission vehicle, but just one of the highlights of the job.
Did you interact when you were interacting, creating those personal connections, was it usually with the military, or did you with just average citizens?
Mainly with so when we deployed, they'd match you up with a unit. Okay, so like our battalion was then partnered with a brigade in Afghanistan. Okay, and so my main partner or influencer was a battalion commander, a Kandak commander. Okay, and so I dealt with him daily. Okay, I probably spent 5 to 6 hours with him daily. Okay, but I was also present for when we would go out to the local villages and the towns, and he would talk with the police chief, he would talk with the mayor, or he would talk with local tribal leaders of that area. And so I basically was that Kandak commander's right-hand man. So when he says, hey, I'm going to try to provide security from this town to this town, the local leaders knew that not only was he going to do that, but he was going to have American assistance, in whatever capacity we could provide.
Do you have a specific story of an example of that? Or any story, really?
Yeah, so the region in Afghanistan that we operated was Salvage province. Okay, Salvage province is the main province just east of Kandahar. Many folks may know the term Kandahar, but Salvage province was, as in all of Afghanistan, very agriculturally based, and so many of the tribal leaders were concerned that they didn't have what's called a kind of farm to market road from where they were harvesting their goods to the town center to sell that. And they specifically wanted security, ramped up security for a certain time of the year so they could get their goods from from farm to market. And so for about 2 weeks straight, we set up it was a combined Afghan and American observation post along this route for about 2 weeks, where we ensured that there was no enemy activity, that individuals within Afghanistan could then travel this route and so forth. So that was kind of, the execution of what we went out and talked to these tribal leaders. They said they wanted this. I worked with the Afghan battalion to say, hey, this is how we're going to do this. You have your resources. We have the American resources. We put them together, and we're able to facilitate, this particular harvest.
Did you stay in touch with any of the Afghan military people that you met?
I did not, just because an email address is not something that everyone has over there, and so going a little off subject on this. My deployment to Afghanistan really it gave me some perspective, because I worked with this Kandak commander, and I worked with a lot of officers from the Afghan army, and so it gave me perspective in the sense that I remember talking to their battalion operations officer. Okay, he was a major. He was born in rural Afghanistan, actually in the northeastern part of the country. He went to their national military academy, much like I did, and had been serving in the army ever since. Had moved around, had been in much more combat and conflict than I had. But when you peeled back the onion, is the differences between him and I was that I was born in the United States and he was born in Afghanistan, and we had very different lives, because what he thought as a luxury didn't really measure up to what kind of we thought as a luxury. And so, like, that particular year really gave me perspective in terms of what I should be grateful for, and what we have, not only in our lives but in the country. To go back to your original question, no, I did not, because it was just the challenge of that. What I have done is that I had a series of interpreters that I used, to communicate. I've kept in contact with about 2 or 3 of those, and actually, I helped one get to the United States on a visa, and he's working towards his American citizenship.
When you come home, are you relieved, or what are your emotions?
Are you talking about from a foreign country, or
Yes.
like daily?
From a foreign country. Let's go with that.
It's always good to see your immediate family. I remember my second time to Iraq. I left, and my oldest daughter was just barely speaking, and then I came home, and now she's saying full-blown sentences, and so that was always it was hard to miss, but those those are moments that you remember. I guess you're happy to be home, but it just makes you realize some of the nice things that we as Americans have in our life and have in our society, and in kind of our way of life.
Do you think you made the right decision in joining the military?
I guess I would throw the question back at you and say, what is the how do we define right? I won't do that to you, but I think it was the right fit for me at the time, and it's the Army has given me a lot of opportunities, and it's provided a good life for our family, soon to be 4 kids. I think I can't necessarily answer the question if it was the right decision, but I think it was the correct and prudent decision at the time.
Going back to the returning from a foreign country, how was
Mhm.
your return received?
Very good. My generation was fortunate enough to be involved in the conflict where, an overwhelming support of the country, uh, the overwhelming part of the country, supported our involvement in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And so, I talked about my uncle, and I don't know how it would have been, within the Vietnam War when, you went and you served your country, you served what your country asked of you, and then to be looked upon in such a negative light by the population. But I think that would have been tough for me. But to answer your question, very well received. Anytime that I was out in uniform, you know, many folks extended their thanks.
Do you have any trouble readjusting to civilian life?
No, not really, because I think if you keep things in perspective, you can do that. No, I've had friends that have had a difficult time, and it's based upon the nature of some of the experiences they had. No, I mean, no real, or no large kind of adjustments. So.
All right. Do you hang on? Did your children have trouble adjusting to you moving and you being away for those times?
Not as of yet. So, oldest daughter's 9, second daughter's 7. My little boy, who literally is an Al Qaeda terrorist, is 2.5. So they were too young at the time to be affected. Now, I will say, the move over here from Alabama to here, and now as we prepare to move back to the States, it is slightly affecting my oldest, who she's at the age where she's developed meaningful relationships with friends, and she understands what is about to happen, and she's seen it with other friends over the course of 2 years here that have moved back to the States. So it's, while it can be hard on the kids, I think it also makes them strong-willed and little tougher, when they got to make new friends at a new place. So.
We talked about you having contact with other Afghan military people, but do you keep contact with fellow American military?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably say 60% of my Facebook friends are, in some form or fashion connected to me through the military. And so, it's just kind of the social group I hang around. We have common interests, common beliefs, and even friends from school that have gotten out of the Army. We still maintain contact, and not to say that I don't have any friends outside the military, but a preponderance of them are have or had served in the military.
Earlier, you kind of answered this question, but are there any life lessons that you have learned through the military?
Yes. Never run with scissors. Okay. If you're over 36 years of age, you shouldn't play basketball weekly. And on a serious note, no, I think it has taught me to enjoy some of the things we have. So, you know, it's easy to look at your, you know, someone's life and focus on, you know, some of the struggles and hardships that we have here in America. But having seen other parts of the world, you know, the lesson that I always try to take with me daily is that, hey, you know, we're very fortunate to have what we have. We're very fortunate to live in a democracy, and we're very fortunate to live in just a country that has a good rule of law and, you know, a good society that we have.
With the path that you have chosen to join the military, would you choose that again, given the chance?
I would, but it'd also be neat to try something else. So, you know, one of the things in the Army is that you always try to seek out the unknown. So, I guess if I had to do it again, knowing what I already knew, I would try something different. But, you know, not going to say no regrets, but very few regrets for the path I chose.
Alright. I think that's it, really. Not really, no. The answer's a lot.
Does he have anything else he wants to share?
Do you have anything else you want to share?
No, I'm proud of my service, but I also realize that, you know, so what I try to tell people is that, you know, people see me in uniform and they come up to me and say, hey, you know, thank you for your service, but, you know, it's the military. Our society needs good people outside the military, and so, like, I often say that my parents were both social workers for the state of Michigan. I often say that my parents did more for, like, the development and nurturement of a society than I ever did. And so, you know, I talked about, you know, we live in a great country and a great society, and it's because of people like that, you know, continue to do the right things that make America what it is, and not just people in uniform.
What would you say that we as civilians can do when we see a service member?
What does he want to hear?
You know, I would say nothing out of the ordinary. Just try to connect on a personal level with them, and, you know, the one funny story a funny story I have is that my wife's sister, we had just recently become married, and my wife's sister asked, hey, what does Rob do all day? And she had this conception that, like, literally all I did all day was march around it. So I think there's a perception out there that folks think that that's all we do in the military. Well, really, you know, the American government uses its military as a projection of its power, okay? And, you know, there's a lot of facets of it. It's not just a military asset. There is, you know, there's an economic aspect it uses its military for. I know I'm going way off base on your question.
No,
but
you're good.
Bottom line is that, you know, folks in the military are just normal folks. They lead the same lives as you pesky civilians. And so, if there was something I would want the larger population to know, is that we're just normal people, and if you run across a service member, talk to him or her like you would any other individual, and that way you can connect kind of on that personal level.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service. Now we're going to have the 10-second silence. So.